ready.
Bismillah.
Because once you start, there's no going back.
Yeah.
Unless you make a mistake, and then we'll go back. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Islam 20's Unscripted Podcast. I'm your host, Salman Butt, and I'm very pleased to introduce our guest today. He is none other than Sheikh Dr. Uthman Lateef. Very close, assalamu alaikum. Very close friend, brother, and teacher to us here. And Uthman has the unique accolade of being the very first ever guest on Unscripted. We did this, I think, 2-3 years ago. And that back in the day when podcasts were just audio, I went to his house and we had a nice, good old chat, alhamdulillah. But he's come a long way since then, and so we hope. How's your dopamine?
Yeah, I was just saying that, we as human beings, we transition, we age, we mature.
Yeah. So last time, anyone who's worked with Dr. Uthman knows that once he gets started in his laughter and his chuckling, it's very hard for him to stop because, mashallah, he's a very bubbly and laughable character. He's very good to test out jokes on this, very generous with his laughter.
Mashallah. But I think that whole concept is important, the idea of simply transitioning, through life. It isn't only that with the fact that we age through life, because the whole idea of human growth isn't predicated on a passing through time. That's something in the Quran that Allah makes very beautifully clear for us. If you think about, there are not that many places in the Quran, in fact, where Allah uses, nabat, yanbut, like the sense of growth. There are some cases Allah mentions that in Juz' Amma and other places also. But one of the beautiful ones I really love is the one concerning Maryam alayhi salam. Because in that case, Allah gives us a whole sequence of what growth is supposed to mean, outside of the way that we might conceptualize it as you're simply growing up, like what does that mean? I'm getting older, days are passing.
Getting closer towards your death.
Yeah, that's it. Like the Sahaba would say that. They would say, Ibn Adam, O son of Adam, إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ إِيَّامْ فَإِذَا ذَهَبَ يَوْمُ ذَهَبَ بَعْضُكَ. You're just a collection of days. If a day leaves you, part of you is also left you. You're growing up, but you're leaving something behind you. The whole idea would be that you're gaining something that's more purposeful, more transcendental, more meaningful, more purposeful. But in Maryam's example, it's because you have the aspiration of the mother Hannah alayhi salam, then you have the fact that she gives birth to a girl, and she doesn't see that as a kind of as such a remarkable impediment. It could be in social terms, because if you're in Jerusalem and you give, what's a girl supposed to do in medieval Jerusalem? Boys could be scribes, could be teachers, could be orators, could be scholars. A girl couldn't do all those things, at least. They would have a different role in society. Later on, however, during the emergence of what we might call Christianity, in medieval Jerusalem, women have had a role in monasteries. So the monastic tradition spread. You had the birth of major religious. This was a revival, in fact. Even Mariology, in fact, was a religious. You call it a cult now.
Wow.
If you stand on the Mount of Olives, and you reflect on the symbolism of the graves, of the tombs of, like, the Church of St. Anne, Mary of Magdalene, you would have women who would come and venerate at the tombs, wearing like cloaks and hoods, in a very kind of iconic Maryified, how would you call it, image, and that was called the cult of Mariology.
You say it's a habit that she started.
No, she didn't start it. It wasn't.
Get it? Habit, nuns.
You're a genius, Salman. You're just a genius.
Not just a pretty face.
I learned from you so many things. Honestly, it's such an honor to be.
I tell you that all the time.
I feel it. I feel it. And so it wasn't just. It wasn't. So therefore, they would have a purpose and a place.
Yeah. He's gotten started now. Okay. Anyone who knows Dr. Uthman knows, obviously, that he's a historian, and your speciality was crusade history, and more recently you've been doing research into empathy and conflict. And I like speaking to Uthman Bhai often, because not just because he laughs at my jokes very easily, but because he brings a kind of subtlety, and I don't like this word, it's been abused a lot, but nuance when analyzing things and reading, and he encourages reading and reflecting and studying, particularly literature and stuff. And I wanted to get some of your thoughts on what's happening in the Muslim world today, okay, in terms of the othering and the dehumanization of Muslims, in particular India, and we've seen what's happening with the Uyghurs in East Turkestan and pretty much all over the world, And Uthman has a lot of insights he can give to that, and hopefully now his dopamine levels would have reduced a bit, so he's able to speak to us again. Alhamdulillah.
Well, Allah in the Quran says, it's Allah who makes you laugh, and Allah makes you cry. So we thank Allah for that emotion, and that's something beautiful that makes us human also at the same time. I don't have a lot of anything, and you say that I don't have a lot, but I think I tell you something about myself. I mean, in 2011, when I finished my PhD, I had this almost kind of euphoric moment. I was teaching a text called Burial at Thebes by Seamus Heaney, and it's in fact a rewrite of an ancient play called Antigone. This is going back to 3 or 4 BC. And the story of Antigone that Seamus Heaney rewrote, by the way, after 2003, after the war in Iraq, it kind of tells a story of an emperor called Creon, and he has people in his army, and there's 2 brothers, one's fighting in his army, one's fighting on the other army, the enemy, other side. And so they both get killed in the battle, and the whole point, so Creon, he has this edict, and he says that the one died fighting for him is going to be buried at Thebes, like this special place of veneration where people die and they get buried. And the one died fighting against him is not allowed to be buried. It's a very, very important concept for us to understand, I think, now in our world today. The idea that the denial of a person's sense of ontological being, your sense of self, not allowed to be buried means you're not allowed to be remembered, not allowed to be acknowledged, not allowed to be saluted, not allowed to be mourned over. All of these things are denied in that whole concept of denial of burial at Thebes. And so the whole begins with the 2 sisters of these 2 brothers. One's called Antigone, one's called Ismene. And Antigone is running home and she's saying, Ismene, have you heard the news? That they both, our brothers were killed, but one's not allowed to be buried. And the whole play is about Antigone trying to bury her brother. Now, Seamus Heaney, in one of his articles, he explained one of his purposes of reasons, the raison d'etre of rewriting that play. And an ancient play, Antigone, was motivated by the war in Iraq. And so I'm sitting there thinking, I've spent, alhamdulillah, a lot of years. History is extremely important, and even what we're talking about now is, in fact, history. But I just felt this moment thinking, my God, what am I doing with my life? I had that kind of, we all do have that sometimes in life.
Have one every day.
Yeah. And I just felt that here is a non-Muslim, and hats off to him for taking up such a good task. And he wanted to show through the war in Iraq and this text the notion of a kind of a worthy and an unworthy victim framing. And he says that what's happening is that if you take the war in Iraq, you can have victims, but in our kind of conception of them, we don't see them as a worthy victims, worthy enough to be mourned over and grieved over. And that's very, very important, because what it means is that there's always going to be victims or human beings in the frame of the self. I was just discussing yesterday about the Disney movie Aladdin, and how Aladdin kind of Aladdin is like from Allah-Deen. I think that's the original name, isn't it? Allah-Deen.
Really?
Aladdin, yeah. But Aladdin becomes Al. But Al is easy to recognize because it's familiar. From a Western concept, it's familiar name. It's kind of Al could just be the neighbor next door. And Aladdin in the cartoon, however, has a lighter skin. right, than all the other Arabs. And Aladdin is the only one that speaks American English. And they all speak
they all speak like this.
That's it. And they all look the same. They're all big, with big beards, and they all have their swords,
Have swords.
And Aladdin, he doesn't fit that. And then Jasmine, which I guess would be from Jasmine, she's also like that, and she speaks American English as well. So the whole idea of recognizability, we call these human frames of recognizability, is by which we, let's say in our context as Westerners, could recognize what constitutes a worthy frame of suffering and what isn't. What is kind of abstracted, what is kind of othered in a sense, what is so odd in someone else's frame of mourning or suffering. And that really, for me, was my first spark of interest. I then began to read a lot around this topic, Judith Butler, Susan Sontag, and there's so many new ones, Barbie Zeliza, and so many others who have written amazing works around this discourse. And I think for us, not only in light of what Muslims undergo in the countries that you've mentioned, but also other human beings. India, for example, the Christians are having a hard time in India all at the same time, Christians. Because the whole Hindutva, which is a very virulent form of Hindu nationalism, the Hindutva, and then they have like RSS, and the RSS reminds me, in fact, of the Interahamwe of Rwanda, because the RSS is like young people enthused by this idea of we're going to return our country to how it used to be before. And so the whole idea of Wapsigar is this idea of we're going to reconvert people to go back to where they used to be, they go back home, meaning it's founded on this idea of cleansing. You got to cleanse the world of all of that, or of India, of all of that, and to make it pure once again. The Interahamwe in Rwanda had a similar kind of notion, and it seemed to RSS, because RSS have access to the media, to the news, to the radio broadcasts, Bollywood, and different. That's it. They disseminate these narratives through those mediums and those channels, and they of course influence people. The Interahamwe in Rwanda in those dreadful years of 1994 and the months preceding would use similar kind of media outlets to try and dehumanize. But
it's much easier to make something go viral now, isn't it? Before
it's haunting. It's just absolutely haunting. I mean, in those days, people would struggle because they wouldn't even have radios. They had to find the batteries, they had to make the things themselves. And it was harder for them. But the whole point is that the message of dehumanization, othering, it's so contagious. It's so contagious. It's like a plague. So and the vocabulary is the same. And this you'll find is similar in all examples of dehumanization. The Tutsis were called cockroaches, vermin. The Muslims of India called cockroaches and vermin. Same with the Jews in Nazi Germany. In Bosnia, the Muslims were called cockroaches, vermin. And a cockroach is a pest.
Kate Hopkins, for example.
That's right. Kate Hopkins, the same thing.
Refugees.
Exactly, as cockroaches. And a cockroach is a pest. You don't like it because it's ugly and it's a pest and it needs to be removed, and everyone knows that. And that's how
you're programmed almost in your kind of limbic system response to react negatively to it. To step on it, to run away from it.
And this is a thing. So therefore, Muslims are really suffering in India because of this. It's different forms of otherness. One of them is a structural otherness, because it's a denial of a place, isn't it? It's a denial of your presence in a specific place. And so like Kashmir is a good example, or Assam, what's happening in Assam, the denial of residence, of nationality. So
you call this structural otherness?
Well, what that is, structural otherness, is that it's an othering through a denial of a place or of a space. We might see that in a bigger term with respect to what we're describing, but even, for example, let's say the wall separating the Palestinians in occupied Palestine. That's an example of well. That's right.
Not belonging.
That's right. African Americans in ghettoized communities is structural otherness. But saying that, however, our lack of appreciation for elderly, for mentally ill, mentally sick, are examples of structural otherness, because that means we've cordoned them off in our mental framing, that they don't belong with us, that they're somewhere else outside of us. They're over there, but they're not here. And these concepts of here and there are very, very crucial. Here and there. Allah uses them, Allahu Akbar, in so many amazing ways. I was just thinking, subhanAllah, the other day.
Iltifat as well.
Sorry?
When Allah is referring to, for example, the disbelievers in the second person, and then he'll switch to the third person as to indicate a kind of أَمْ لَكُمْ أَيْمَانٌ عَلَيْنَا بَالِغَةٌ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ سَلْهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ بِذَلِكَ زَعِيمٌ.
Allah
do you have some kind of a book that you'll Allah is rhetorically asking the disbelievers, do you have some kind of pact with me that you'll be saved on the resurrection? And then Allah says, ask them which one of them will. So that's a kind of moving away, iltifat.
That's true.
Likewise, bringing someone closer.
A beautiful way that the closeness element is brought together. It's beautiful narrative in Surah An-Naml in the Quran concerning Sulaiman alayhi salam and the ants. Because in one verse Allah is saying, وَحُشَّرَ لِسُلَيْمَانَ جُنُودُهُ مِنَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ وَالطَّيْرِ فَهُمْ يُوزَعُونَ. There are 3 times in the Quran this phrase is used, فَهُمْ يُوزَعُونَ, that they're all assembled, together. And 2 of them are concerning Yawm al-Qiyamah, that we're all going to be assembled before Allah. And this is the third one. This is the other one. That's not Yawm al-Qiyamah. And Allah is saying that Sulaiman's army of humans and jinn and birds are all gathered before him. So what comes to your mind if you think of a place of power, might, civilization, grandeur, all of these things, and then Allah changes it immediately, and Allah says, "Hatta idha atau ala wad an-naml," until they come to the valley of Dan. You don't, Dr. Salman, always live we don't always live in the same place, and I don't mean that in a sense of we don't live in the same demographic place or space all the time. I don't mean that. I mean that mentally, we're not always in the same place, and everything is in flux. Everything in our entire being is in flux. Allah in the Quran says, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامِ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. These are days we alter amongst the people, but a lot is altering. It isn't just one thing altering. A lot is altering. Our minds, mental states, our state of heart, our state of being, our state of physical, everything is altering in the passing of time. So Allah is saying then, until they come to the valley of the ants. Now, and the chapter, by the way, is called Surah An-Naml, the chapter of the ants, right? The ants. And Allah says
something materially is very small.
That's
and
it.
You might think insignificant.
That's it. But it's extremely significant. So much so that Allah named the surah after the ants. قالت نملة, the female ant spoke and says, يا أيها النمل ادخلوا مساكنكم. O ants, enter your homes. And notice, it's not a house, dar, manzil, bayt. It's second. It's maskan, second.
Home, even
they,
house.
That's it. What makes a home a house is empathy, warmth, love, place, protection. All of these things make, and even the ants, therefore, the smallest, the most, you might think, unworthy, still have a place of belonging, a sense of space, sense of importance, worth, And so, and then Sulaiman, and then he said, because Sulaiman could crush you and his army could, and you won't perceive it. فَتَبَسَّمَ ضَاحِكًا مِنْ قَوْلِهَا. Now that's in a very internalized state now. That's also transitioning, because it's a transitioning of mood, of feeling, Maybe in the beginning it was, and by the way, Allah says, وَخُشِرَ is فُعِلَ. It's not like Fir'aun. Fir'aun is active because فَحَشَرَ فَنَادَى. حَشَرَ فَحَشَرَ. He gathered and he arranged. قَالَ أَنَا رَبَّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى. You see, the Sulaiman isn't that guy. It's all done for him, and he's kind of the passive recipient of all of this. But the key thing is, so we have a space of here, a space of there, and a space of elsewhere in the discourse of spatial identities. And so when he smiled and he laughed at what the ant just said, he made his dua to Allah, Rabbi awzi'ani, my Lord, inspire me, an ashkura ni'matak التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي وأن أعمل صالحا ترضاه وأدخلني برحمتك في عبادك الصالحين. So that the elsewhere space for us as Muslims is a key one, because everything must connect back to Allah. Isn't it? Every encounter, every realization, everything that you're witnessing, spectacle, must connect back to what does it mean in light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So
Assalamu alaikum, guys, sorry to butt in, But if you're enjoying this podcast, please head over to islam20c.com/donate to help us make more. And if you're not enjoying it, head over anyway and help us make better ones. So in terms of like dehumanization, a lot of people, everyone kind of instinctively recognizes the fact that, okay, the way some people are spoken about is othering, is, drawing a wedge between them and us, this over there and over here, this in-group and out-group. And sometimes it's, benign, like this is my team that I support, that's the other team. Sometimes it's a bit more serious, obviously, if there's kind of power involved and structural discrimination and so forth. But one way some people try to combat that is by trying to rehumanize the dehumanized or the othered, such as Muslims, for example. You might have seen the story that people are sharing. I think Ilmfeed put it up of a Muslim couple just helping out a young lady who was kind of drunk and lost on New Year's Eve, and they took her in and called her parents, and their parents were like, we used to hate Muslims, but now after seeing this act of kindness, we like Muslims now, and you guys are all right, you're not all terrorists or whatever. Now, as a kind of isolated story, it's very powerful, and it's one way to rehumanize, right? But as you know, there were some people who are criticizing this in terms of, that's not how you fix or fight racism, right? For example, or what you might have called structural othering.
If you imagine, like, look at these paintings on the wall over here. We're alerting people that we're actually in a room. What is? Or the one behind you. Yeah, or the one behind
paintings
you.
Added in post.
That's it. You see, all of us have a mental canvas. Like these paintings are painted on a canvas. We all have a mental canvas, okay? To otherize and dehumanize somebody, you have to paint on that canvas with a wide brush, and you paint broad strokes, okay?
Low resolution.
Low resolution, that's it. So the whole idea is that you're denying an individualization or individuality, because if you're painting with wide strokes and broad brushes, that means you're not concerned about small nuances, like small distinct features of expression, because they're all one and the same thing. They're all one big, one big problem,
Indistinguishable mess.
That's it. You can't distinguish it. And that's how dehumanization begins, therefore. It begins with...
And ironically, that's how we kind of programmed to treat pests as swarms.
That's as swarms, exactly. As all one, like locusts, they're all one and the same.
They're individuals, but we see them as...
That's it. So therefore, so it's happening, therefore, at a mental level. It's cognitive, because you're creating that image of the other in your mind, of what how he behaves, what he does, what he's predisposed to doing, and everything. It's both easy and hard to dehumanize. I'll tell you why it's hard for us, because it's against your fitrah. It's against your fitrah. It's against your internal being of goodness that Allah created within you to dehumanize somebody else. Why? Because whenever you see yourself, you're supposed to see somebody else in you and see yourself in somebody else, isn't it? These are human codes, like I mentioned, familiarity. We can recognize each other through ourselves. The same
requires a process of kind of indoctrination to move someone away from that.
It does.
Like white supremacy. Or
that's it. So what you have to do is that you have to. This is why animal, using animal features of dehumanization, metaphors of animal, or like zoomorphism. These are very essential, because what it does is it shows, well, they're not actually like you, because they're actually more like animals, like savages, like barbarians, they behave like animals, they look like animals, they're different to you. And it's once that difference is created, then it opens up the space of dehumanization.
At one point they were even put black people in zoos in European countries.
Well, interesting is one thing I discuss in my book, because the famous case is of a boy called Otabenga. This is 1919, if I remember. Otabenga was taken from, he's a pygmy boy, so very short, and he was taken from Gambia, in Senegambia, and he was taken to Bronx Zoo in New York, and he was put on with the orangutans and the monkeys, and he was kept there. And so he was kind of part of the primates. I mean, he was put there to be part of the exhibition. The people, so when the visitors came, the whole idea was that he's not fully primate, not fully monkey, nor is he fully human. He's kind of something in between. And all he had to do, and so they instructed him, what you have to do, you have to kind of play with the monkeys, hold this up, And by making
don't give him any rights.
That's it. But by making him look like that, you see, it affected people's perceptions of him until they thought, well, he's actually... And it's interesting part. So once Uthman, it's reported that he began to cry. Very powerful. So he had his head in his hands like that and he's weeping. And they realized, you know what, that can't be animal-like because I cry. We all cry. That's a human emotion. And then it was a big uproar from the African-American community that how could you do something like this? And then, interesting, like the Times newspaper, the Times Journal, the Times Chronicle, major newspapers took interest in this story. I argue, I mean, it was still kind of couched in a vernacular that you could argue is still dehumanizing him, although there was more of a sympathy projected towards him. The other thing, of course, look at the Holocaust. In the Holocaust, the book by Philip Muller, Eyewitness Auschwitz, is a good example of this, or even Zvetan Todorov's book, Facing the Extreme Moral Life in the Concentration Camps, because he says that what Himmler's idea was, Himmler and Horst and Adolf Eichmann, was to strip the Jews naked. Now, in making them naked, and starve them. So if they're naked and they're starved, it's much easier for the SS soldiers, for the Nazi soldiers, to kill them because they simply don't look like human, or do they act like they're human, because they're scavenging like they're just animals, and they don't. And humans wear clothes, so they're out of their normative frame. Therefore, they're not fully human. Therefore, it's easy for them to be killed. A very good book I would recommend we all read is a book I bought many years ago called A is for Ox. Is A for Ox, Dr. Saman?
No.
Think. Come on, think.
A is for Ox.
Think about it. Think, work. Your mind works through it. Come on.
I feel this is a trick question.
So the author is Barry Sanders. He's American.
Okay, so now it makes sense.
Yeah. I kept the vital information from you. So A is for Ox.
Probably somewhere. A is for Ox.
That's it. So it's a good book. I mean, he discusses gangs in America in the 1990s, gang culture and shootings and literacy, important. So he connects these two things, and he says that for example, the most famous weapon for gangsters in the 1990s was a weapon called Cobra M11. Could fire like 1,000 rounds a minute or something.
I think Mahmoud has one of them.
Astaghfirullah. Well, Allah save us, And so he says that the whole purpose is that for the gangster making the hit, it isn't to simply kill your target. It is to create a kind of a mess. It's to obliterate, to terminate, to annihilate. And he says that the gangsters, when they're caught, these murderers, they never use words like kill or like die. These are like simplistic words for them.
These words like
destroy, annihilate, terminate, obliterate, and then
kill means you're assigning life to that thing in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what he does, I remember Barry Sanders, is he kind of asks his question. He says, what would you do if you took one of these individuals and you put him in a room, like in a cell, okay? He says, by the way, it's very likely that the people who are doing this don't have access to literature, or they don't read, or they don't they have, if they're in maybe he's speaking about that time, Allah knows best how it is today. Maybe it's worse, Allah knows best, maybe it's better, but he says they don't have access to literature. They're just going to have computer games, satellite TV, drugs, in their homes, and that's
what
kind of...
What year was this? He wrote this?
I can't remember exactly, but I'm assuming it's going to be early 2000s, perhaps. But what he says, and he says, if you put one of these people in a room and you made him read a book like an autobiography, And he mentioned that specifically, so because what's going to happen is that for the first moment they're going to encounter another human life, and they're going to realize that the barrel to which I'm pointing towards, I'm not pointing towards a thing. I'm pointing towards someone like me who also has a mother, also has a father, has children, has hopes and dreams and fears and anticipations and all of these things. And these can come out at a very fitra-based level. You know, some you might be quite shocked. So one of the big things I look at is the refuseniks. The refuseniks are those who refuse to serve in the IDF in Israel. You know, they refuse to serve, and so
because they have some empathy.
Well, yeah. I mean, the whole idea is that they have a conscience. I mean, they witness injustice. You know, and they witness such horrendous mistreatment of the Palestinians that it affects them, in a level that this can't be what makes us humans, And so I think that it's both difficult to dehumanize because it's fitra based, but it's also very easy, depending on how you've been programmed, and how you're now perceiving of the other. And so
so we can, focus on individual, like this chessboard here. You can get a pawn and say, try to rehumanize yourself, try to give him a book or her a book, or teach them that they've been brainwashed or whatever, or to otherize people. But the whole chessboard isn't going. Is that how it works? Or because I feel sometimes that you need both. You need the micro approach and you need the macro structural approach as well.
For sure, absolutely.
So and either camp, people are naturally going to be inclined towards one more than the other, because of their interests, their personality, or whatever. But I think it's mistaken for one to criticize the other, because the person involved in fighting, someone's structurally anti-racist who's maybe in the academy or in politics or whatever, they're working on structural issues. For them to then look at a post like that of one person rehumanizing himself or his people to an individual and fixing their problem, they might look down upon that and say, that's not how you fix a problem. But then the person who is involved in grassroots kind of individual activism and da'wah and that kind of stuff, he might look down upon the person doing the structural political things as some kind of sellout or whatever. I think you need both.
No, I think, for sure. I think both play error. I used to give you the example because it was about what we were talking about, because you mentioned the single example of the men who saved the girl who was, I think, drunk after a night out on New Year's Day. And it's one single narrative, but it had an effect because it changed people's perceptions of Muslims, what they stand for and the values. But it's a very important one, because remember, that could represent the seeds of a generational change. Because if it's two parents, and they've encountered Muslims for the first time, then this is going to affect how they're going to teach their children, their grandchildren, their neighbors. So one seed could represent a generational change, in fact. So we should never see that as a lack of...
That's how many, huge things happen by individuals. The way we learn history is Salahuddin, he liberated Al-Quds. But it wasn't Salahuddin by himself. It was every individual in the army, in the writing the poems, writing the whatever, making the arrows and all that kind of stuff, fashioning the swords and forging the swords.
A good example I give just for this point you mentioned is, I give the example of Ali ibn Tahir al-Sulami. Ali ibn Tahir, he wrote the first scholastic response to the Crusades called Kitab al-Jihad. And he had you had sama'at, you had these public readings in many of the centers, like schools, mosques and madrasas, sometimes in gardens, But his book that was written early, he died in 1105, and 1099 Al-Quds was taken, it didn't have much of a response. People didn't pay that much attention to it. There were more important ones. Abdul ibn Mubarak also has Kitab al-Jihad, rahimahullah, and he was more renowned, of course, early on, and he's part of the great Islamic early tradition, and he's very well known. And but interestingly, what happened is that in the decades that ensued afterwards, As-Sulami still wasn't that important. I don't even think Ibn Mubarak's text was that important. I don't think it was. I think by that time people like Ibn Asakir had authored Tarikh Dimashq, and they had their own things happening, and that was very popular because it was commissioned by Nuruddin Zengi. But interestingly, in 1187, before Al-Quds was recaptured, and I think during the time of the Battle of Hittin, they used a Sunami's text. 1105, I mean, they used his. He was dead long before that, of course, but they used his text as a kind of a final push that we're going to recapture. And of course, he's naming the Crusaders. He's calling them Al-Franj. He's calling them. He even says that they're coming on a jihad against us. So he used that word jihad, But it's interesting how he could never have imagined, but it was a seed that he had planted. That was focused on the recapture of Al-Quds and that kind of won the day at the end. So should never undermine even the smaller efforts. But
absolutely,
of course, but like you mentioned, for that to be tackled, there has to be kind of a national and international response to that. The media plays a very big role. Politicians play a very big role.
I mean, it's not enough for someone just to be not racist themselves or not dehumanizing actively someone else. I think that a lot of people say that a lot of people in anti-racism struggles, they say it's not enough to be not racist yourself. Right. You have to be anti-racist. You have to actively try and fight this dehumanization and othering, and part of that is rehumanizing. I think
absolutely,
that's important.
Absolutely.
I mean, as long as it doesn't fall into other kind of problematic narratives like the good Muslim, bad Muslim thing. This is one of the good ones.
So worthy of being humanized.
Yeah, this is one of the good immigrant, bad immigrant that's kind of dichotomy as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And and it's also in the framing as well. So, I mean, I was thinking, this story about the girl who was kind of helped by the Muslim couple. I mean, imagine if it was like a Daily Mail headline or something, a drunk teenager kidnapped by a Muslim couple or something, and rescued by her parents the morning after. So, I mean, it's important for us to have, being involved in our own narratives about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you really made a good point there, because the narrative, there's two things. One is kind of the visual framing, and the other is a narrative. But every visual framing is kind of is based on bound by a narrative, isn't it? So you might see an image, but the tagline describing the image, of course, informs you what the image is about. If the tagline is skewed, contorted, it's going to affect your perception of the. So both have to be in place. Reminds me, in fact, of the day of Uhud. When Abu Sufyan was kind of exultant, and he was making these, and he was saying, he says, "Afikum Muhammad, is Muhammad amongst you?" Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the Prophet was there, and he said to Sahaba, he says, "La tujibuhu, don't answer him." It's about
controlling the narrative.
Control the narrative. That's it. Don't answer him. Don't answer him. And then he says, "Afikum Abu Quhafa, is Abu Bakr amongst you?" And the Prophet says, "La tujibu, don't answer him." Then he says, "Afikum Ibn al-Khattab, is Umar amongst you?" He says, "La tujibu, don't answer him." And then Abu Sufyan says, "U'lu Hubal, how high is Hubal?" What the Prophet say? Ajibu, now answer him. Now Allah is concerned. Now answer him, And I just found that really beautiful.
Allahu a'la wa ajal.
Allah, that's it. And then Umar says, فَمَاذَا نَقُولُ يَا Rasulullah? What do we say, Ya Rasulullah? And the Prophet says, say, قُل Allahu a'la wa ajal. The Prophet is telling them this is what your narrative should be. And so therefore it's very powerful. We have a responsibility to really control our own narrative,
not to react to someone else's.
No, exactly, because that's just disempowering. You empower yourself by formulating your own narrative. I think people like Martin Luther King was quite prominent in this respect, because he capitalized on that very important year of 1955, during the horrific murder of Emmett Till. And by the way, that's all dehumanization, isn't it? What led to someone committing such an act of brutality on an innocent child? It has to be years and years of programs. So what's happening is that, you mentioned to rehumanize. I tell you why it's that hard. It requires much more effort. Because for you to rehumanize, you have to unpeel and unpeel layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of stereotyping before you get to the human being in the frame. You see, because with all of that stereotyping and your coloring and your messing around, there's going to be, it's going to leave such an impression on a person's mental psyche that this person isn't fully human like me. But to get to a point where you can at least see the human being in the frame is a very, very big thing. And so, and people like also, because the year was important because you had, you had Rosa Parks, same year, Montgomery bus boycott, you had Emmett Till, same year. But he capitalized on that to really restructure a narrative. And there's a lot of African Americans, in fact, who were not supportive of the NAACP, of his Southern Baptist movement. But that kind of the sense of energy and a sense of narrative making really turned them, I think, in favor of that. And the same, in some respects, could be used as an example for the Holocaust.
Speaking of Emmett Till, it reminded. I was speaking about this the other day about how since his death and mutilation became a kind of icon for the civil rights struggle. Likewise in Syria, Hamza Ali Khatib, a 13-year-old who was abducted by the secret police and tortured and mutilated, and all kinds of horrific mutilation happened on him. He was, used as an icon for and sparked waves and waves of protests and ultimately, the Syrian revolution as well.
That's true.
And,
that's true.
Partly you have no choice. You have no choice but to try and react and try to do something to,
it's true.
Not avenge, but kind of shine a light on this.
Exactly. People like Ida B. Wells. I mean, this is before. Ida B. Wells was like the beginning, I think, of the 20th century. These were like, Ida B. Wells was amazing because what she would do is that she would go around to places where black men had been lynched. And she would just simply go there and report on the stories, describe those people. And she had her own kind of small newspaper, But as a kind of, I'm sure she had people supporting her, but she's known as being one of the first ones that went to make the people aware of the horrific nature of lynching.
I think sometimes that the dehumanization, although when we talk about it, we kind of and the ideological aspects as well, white supremacy, Nazism, all that kind of stuff. When we talk about these things, we talk about them as happening before the actual oppression. But sometimes I think, it's not that clear a distinction. Sometimes I feel sometimes that the ideology or the discourse doesn't precede the oppression, but sometimes it comes afterwards as a justification for or a rationalization for continuing the oppression.
It's just true.
Whether it's imperialism, the white man's burden kind of discourse, or what you said, Adolf Eichmann said about Jews, how to treat the Jews in the concentration camps. I think that was partly, not to say they weren't motivated, some people weren't motivated by blind kind of hatred and white supremacy and anti-Semitism, but partly it's a useful tool to use to forward your kind of political...
Well, the big trouble is that in our world today, the whole notion of like terrorist or extremist is used like that, because that's your justification. What's happening with the Uyghur Muslims of China is precisely that. And so they're doing horrendous treatment of the Muslims. That's beyond structural otherness, because that's not only keeping them in their own ghettos, if you like, but that is an ethnic cleansing of the Muslims. But as long as they play this kind of extremist card, because
they're using fully bought into the war on terror rhetoric.
That's it. So the rest of the world will kind of believe them, because that's everyone knows.
Because a terrorist or an so-called extremist is someone who you can legitimately take the rights away from, and
that's right,
and come down with all the levers of state coercion.
Right. That's exactly what happens. Yeah,
it's a type of otherness.
That's right. It is, absolutely.
Assalamu alaikum guys, me again, reminding you to head over to islam21c.com/donate to keep the lights on Islam 21c. We pride ourselves on being independent and being funded by the grassroots community. So one way to kind of help, because what we try and do at Islam 21c is always trying to give, there's a lot of doom and gloom out there. We try to give some kind of practical advice to people, Muslim brothers and sisters watching, listening. What can we do in our, sphere of influence, sphere of control, sphere of concern? What can we do in order to help rehumanize, to help, oppose the dehumanization, the othering, to help our brothers and sisters in Uyghur, in East Turkestan, in Kashmir, in India, and in Syria. What do you advise people when you talk about this kind of stuff?
Well, I don't have all the answers, but I would simply say that, in a very simple way, it is to be a better Muslim. It isn't. That's as a simple way for us to be more conscious, more aware of what is Islam, and to practice Islam in a better way. That means, of course, that you have to have a mindset that you're going to try and be the best worshipper of Allah, and the best, in servitude to kind of, to man, like you're at the service of man in that sense. Remember, of course, the Prophet ﷺ, the first, in a kind of in the consciousness of Khadija radiallahu anha, when he came from the cave, and he was, of course, worried, and Khadija says to him, Kalla, no, Allah would never do you any wrong. Why innaka la tasil al-rahim wa tahmil al-kal. You, and everything she mentioned was in
Allah
relation to his role. That's it. You're good in society. That's it. It's all his social role. And we have to have a very important social role as Muslims. I was just
in the Prophet ﷺ was doing 40 years before.
That's right. Just helping society.
Started.
People have to see your presence. They have to feel you, know you. The Prophet ﷺ was somebody who everybody knew. And even in the one hadith, the Prophet said, "Ala akhbirukum bima nuhrim aw tuhrim ala nar." Shouldn't I tell you who the fire is forbidden on? And they said, who is it? Ya Rasulullah said, "Kullu qareebin hayyin sahlin." Every accessible, mild, polite person. That person is easy to deal with. May Allah make you, all of us, of those people. But someone that people can approach. I think we sometimes create our own barriers. We have amongst ourselves senses of a feeling of superiority, or like we're our own kind of our own in groups we make amongst ourselves. But we have to not do that. Empathy means that you can really try and perspective take with somebody else. Put yourself in another person's position. What does it feel like? The very beautiful hadith of the man when he came and saw the dog. The man was thirsty and hungry. He went in the well, in the hadith, and then he saw the dog, and he says, "لقد بلغ هذا الكلب من العطش." He says, the dog is experiencing the same thing that I was experiencing. Thirst. So he realized this is cognitive. You have to have affective empathy, cognitive empathy, a feeling for other people. And I think there's many ways for us to do that. Look, we live in communities, we live in societies, we live in streets and roads. We should get to know our neighbors. We should have something like a neighborhood watch. We should be the caretakers of that. We should look out for our neighbors, look out for people. We should never be bystanders to injustices, whether they're localized, whether they're national or international. We should remember the great role that rescuing plays in this. And that could be rescuing, helping somebody who is suffering from debt, poverty, disease, alienation, discrimination, war, hunger, all of these things. But just simply to have in the frame of mind, Man kana minkum ra'a munkar, and whoever amongst you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. Having a sense of activity about yourself, being a sense of being active in the response of other people.
Do you think this kind of stuff is becoming easier or harder? Because with the
I think it's harder. I think it's harder now because of the rise of social media.
Yeah. Every time I log on, I get more and more depressed at the state of.
No, well, maybe we should never be depressed.
The algorithm's kind of trolling me, showing me stuff that's going to make me, annoyed and stuff. Yeah. But I see just, there's so much stuff that can be talked about, and so much urgent stuff. Yeah. But I just see Muslims with so much potential, just fighting each other and refuting, this scholar and that sheikh and that person for.
I tell you something. You should read. You should read Neil Postman. Honestly, I used to tell people years ago, because Neil Postman, he was visionary in that sense, and it wasn't him. He was from a school of thinking as a kind of a radical social scientist, you could say, a social critic. People like Daniel Bernstein, The Image, a guide to pseudo events in America, and even going back before that, Aldous Huxley, of course. You have Brave New World, Reconsidered, considered. reconsidered. So he's
entertaining ourselves to death.
Well, so that's the title of Postman's book. Yeah. Amusing ourselves to death, because in his idea that the Homo sapien becomes a Homo scenicus, the man of understanding becomes a man, the entertainer. You were all entertainers. If I have a YouTube, if I have Facebook, I'm the entertainer. I don't need another. I am the entertainer. I become the man. And that's Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. So you have a proliferation of information and everything in books. No one wants to read because we're all
quick.
That's it. It has to be quick, and we're all. That's it. We're all self-immersed. We're all immersed in ourselves, And so I can't see anything outside of my own self-importance. This is grandiosity. If you think about Dajjal, Dajjal, people, they forget Dajjal. Actually, he has weaknesses. He's not like this all-powerful being. I mean, that's one of the things why he's not Allah. He's not like Allah is Al-Qawi Al-Mateen Al-Hayy Al-Qayyum. The Dajjal has small things and miracles he will work. I mean, it's the biggest fitna because it will really tempt people away from Allah. But the Dajjal, like the young man from Medina, who will come and see the Dajjal, and people, Sahaba thought he was going to be Umar because he has that sense of bravado about him. And he says, Ashhadu annaka Dajjal alladhi haddathana. I testify you are the Dajjal, our Prophet. By the way, check this out. So, before he does that, he comes to the guards of the Dajjal in Hadith. And he says, he will ask them, he says, where is he? Where is the Dajjal, And they will say to him, awala tu'min? Like, you don't believe he's Allah, the God? And they will say, no, I so innahu al-masih al-kadhab, he is the false Messiah, the false imposter. And then they want to kill him. Now take this. When I read this, I thought, this is crazy. So they're going to kill him, yeah? But then one of them speaks and says, wait, أوليس نهاكم ربنا أن تقتلوا أحدا دونه? Hasn't our Lord forbidden that for us to kill anyone except him? And I thought, that's just like the Nazis were like that. The Nazis. You think the Nazis have this they have this horrendous killing machine, very punctual killing, mass killing, gassing to death, on time. But it had to function like that. And there are reports that sometimes the SS, the Nazis, they would kill random Jews, and they'd be disciplined for that. Sometimes even killed for that, because they went against the order of the system, that you're defying Hitler's orders, that this has to run like clockwork. This is a system. And I thought, they're saying something similar. They say, you can't kill him, only Dajjal can kill him. And then they're taken to Dajjal, and Dajjal says, the hadith, he will say, you are the Dajjal our Prophet told us about. And then he will look to his people. And this is like Fir'aun, because he will say to him, أرأيتم إن قتلت هذا ثم أحييته أتشكون في الأمر. Do you see, all of you, this is a spectacle creating, because they remember that every person immersed in self-grandiosity needs a spectacle. You cannot function as a human being by yourself. So the whole process we have in Islam of khalwa, these things are really, may Allah grant us that. Yeah, because that's where your self-worth is found. This hadith we're mentioning about the Prophet, he was in a cave in seclusion. He's finding himself, and Allah is giving him everything, But that's so important for self-discovery. You can't have self-discovery only through the lens of 1,000 cameras at you, because
on social media accounts.
So that's it, because they're learning something about you. But is that you? When O.J. Simpson, in the infamous killing of his wife and the wife's friend. When that happened? What year was it? 1999 or 8, something like that. But there's a very ironic thing. It's such a big irony that O.J. Simpson, when he left, there's a very famous, iconic scene of him in his Bronco car, Ford Bronco, I think it was called. And he's on the motorway, the highway, like in America, and he's driving at speed, and there's this kind of like he says, swarm of police cars behind him. And he's just driving, and they're driving behind him. O.J. Simpson left a note on his TV screen before he left. Do you know that?
No.
Guess what he wrote on it?
Wasn't me.
That's too predictable, brother. Come on, you must use your brain. Come on.
Okay, it's hard, man. I've been on social media too much. I don't have any more new ones left.
No, check this out. He wrote on the note, remember the real OJ. Now think about the irony in that. OJ Simpson is only a celebrity, only an actor and only a footballer. No one has a clue of who the real OJ is. But the assumption is that there is a real OJ on the screen, and that's the real OJ, but it's not. The spectacle. Now the world found out who the real OJ was, and that's the other kind of double, triple irony comes across through this. And so we have to be careful of that, because there is a danger of self-grandiosity, of coming in love, like the narcissist, becoming in love with yourself. And in that sense, then you're really...
And the way these things are set up, it rewards, simplistic, short sound bites, clickbaity stuff, which, some of us engage in. Sorry.
Well, this was Boriston and Postman's. This was the kind of the fare, because the idea was that if you're living in a world of mass media and entertainment, and your fixation is with the visual image as opposed to the written word, you will lose as a human being the patience to be able to read and process the depth of information. When that happens, you're only going to ever be used to sound bites. You only want small, quick bits of information, because you can't deal with processing.
Can't read a
chunks.
book.
You can't read you can't chunks of information, because it requires patience. And patience you can't deal with, because you want quick access, quick internet, quick everything, and you can't handle it. This is taking too long for me to understand what's happening in it. But this is going to have an effect on you. And
it's something, it also pulls on some kind of primal desire of ours to have certainty in something and have it quickly. If I just think about some of the controversies you find about, people talking about du'at and scholars and that kind of stuff, they might have an opinion which is, maybe a bit controversial, but generally speaking, they're an orthodox person, they're a mainstream scholar or something. They might do something politically questionable or whatever, or, say something that some people might regard as a mistake or incorrect. People just want the instant kind of, okay, is he a good person or a bad person?
Yeah, that's it.
It's not the fact that...
Yeah, we do a disservice to ourselves, and I'm being honest with you, because if you look at even the scholarly traditions amongst in other settings, they don't behave like that. They have more calm, more composure, more sense of, we have to evaluate what's happening. And we shouldn't be so quick to react. Another
even
person,
in our own tradition earlier on, before modernity, before social media.
That's right.
Ibn al-Qayyim said such an amazing quote. He said, "Zalatul ulama aqdar wa hum bihar." He said the mistakes of scholars are like pieces of dirt, whilst they are oceans. Yeah, and even the process of when water reaches a particular amount, then an impurity doesn't affect it.
Allahu Akbar. And even the word zal, in fact, isn't mistake. It means a slip. Yeah. The word zal means a slip. And the word zal, look how it's used in the Quran. I mean, this is powerful, because this is what, when
Adam alayhi salam.
Yeah, that's it. There's no great fall that necessitates a savior coming to redeem you, because Adam just slipped. It's only a slip, a stumble, and then Allah helped him up, because فَتَلَقَّى آدَمْ مِنْ رَبِّ كَلِمَاتٍ, Allah inspired Adam with the words to say to make tawbah. Now look at this narration of Umar. In Umar's Khilafah, there was a man who was got involved in a major sin, and he became shamed, and so he went away from the masjid, kept himself in he's doing his major sin. And Umar once asked, where is that man that we used to see in the masjid? Where is he gone? And they said, oh, he's doing this major sin now, and so this is why he doesn't come back. And Umar says to call somebody who can write, and we'll write a letter to the man and we'll send it to him. And Umar just wrote he says, number one, min Umar ibn al-Khattab, not like min Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is a man to man. We're all human beings. We're all in this together. Ila fulan ibn fulan, to you. One verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Ghafir, Allah is غافر ذنب وقابل التوبة شديد العقاب ذي الطول لا إله إلا هو إليه المصير. That's it. One ayah. Stamp it, send it. Seal it, send it. Allah is saying Allah is a forgiver of sins, Allah is the acceptor of repentance, Allah is severe in punishment, Allah's blessings are endless, and everything goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no God except Him, no one deserves worship except Him, and Allah's blessings are, and everything goes back to Allah. And then after a while, Umar asked, what has happened to that man that we were worried about, we sent him, and they said, he's back with us, And Umar said this to him, he said, هكذا فاصنعوا إذا رأيتم أخا لكم زل زلة ولا تكونوا أعوان للشيطان عليه. This is how you behave if you see one of your brothers slip, and don't be shaitan's supporter against him. Right? Now this is a standard. This is how we're supposed to behave. Like you mentioned the Ibn al-Qayyim's quote. It isn't that you kind of throw all the boulders at a person whenever you notice something that's kind of not to your full liking. It is that you have a sense of patience, a sense of discipline, maturity, deal with things. I mean, the ulama should deal with...
How do you get that? How do we encourage people to get that? One way we try to do is encourage reading, because when you read someone's written word, you're forced to, pay attention to detail, to go along
an extended argument. I think everyone should know their place. Like it is not befitting for us to delve into areas that we're not familiar with. There are things that the ulama they discuss, they talk about, they write about. Everyone has their own place. We should respect them. Yeah, it's
everywhere.
It's a trouble, and the sad thing is everybody. Yeah, it's sad. I mean, there's a beautiful saying in Arabic that says, "Aynama anbatakallah fazra." Wherever Allah plants you, blossom. I mean, you can be beautiful and blossom wherever you are. There's no need for you to capture the entire world and think, if I don't have this. This is in fact connected to compare and despair culture of Instagram, Snapchat, because young children, they feel as if I'm not everywhere, and I can't be as many have many likes as this my friend, whatever, and I'm just going to live in that sense of despair. And in order to fulfill my sense of happiness, I have to do something that's more outlandish, more crazy, more kind of sensational than look at me. And I think this is it's a bit like this culture, I think, maybe stemming from this, because it's more about sensationalist headlines, sensationalist videos, sensationalist presence, persona. You have to sound sensationalist, and to make yourself, and then your followers are thinking, this really must be the thing, And I think there is a deception in this. And I think
begin to believe you're on hype as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Our Sheikh, Murabbi, he said something once, I only recently appreciated it. He said this years ago. He said, don't feel like the Ummah needs you, or Islam needs you, to refute something or to clarify something, and if you don't clarify, if you don't say something, then Islam, the truth will be lost, and mainstream or orthodox opinions will be disappeared because you didn't speak out.
Allah Akbar.
And I saw the people have gone down the path of trying to, according to their opinions and their analysis of things, which is an ijtihadi issue, started refuting scholars and getting worse and worse and worse, and pointing their guns at fellow Muslims, let alone du'at and scholars and leaders and so forth. I've seen where that's taken them. It's such a blessing to be prevented from.
Allah keep away. This is Allah in the Quran.
Might feel like this kind of savior complex that if I don't speak out, then Islam will be lost, and everyone will start wearing rainbow flags and start doing all kinds of nonsense.
Just know your place. I mean, that's the thing. When there's a beautiful maxim, it comes from Umar bin Abdul Aziz. It says so he had a son, and his son went and bought an expensive ring, and Umar wasn't there, and they wrote to Umar. They said, your son, what he's done is. And Umar wrote to his son, and he says, I want you to go and sell this ring and go and buy a ring made of a Chinese copper, I mean the cheapest material.
Even back then, the Chinese were low labor costs and cheaper.
And he said, have engraved on the ring.
Made in China.
No, not made in China, brother. Allah give you hidayah, man. He said, have engraved on the ring, may Allah have mercy on the man who knows his true worth. Meaning, you keep yourself, Allah, don't walk on the earth with insolence. The poet said, ولا تمشي في الأرض إلا تواضعا فكم تحت من قمن منك أرفع. Don't walk on the earth except with humility. How many people under the earth are higher than you? Keeping a sense of, you know, the earth will bear witness for you or against you. You don't want to be such so heavy-handed, you know, with in your sense of being in persona towards others. So all of these things are extremely important. I think that just a sense of respect for the tradition, respect for tradition, you know, we should learn a lot about adab, mannerism, you know. In the Islamic history, you know, we had great books, you know, written by like the tradition on the mirrors of princes, which was a tradition written for the sultans, but it's about behaviorism. Even other was adab, books on akhlaq, are very, very, because without this, like the ulama would say, Imam Malik would say to the children, Ya bunay, ta'allam al-adab, learn manners before you learn knowledge. His mother said to him, Ya bunay, idhab ila Rabi'a fata'allam min adibi qabla ilmi, go to Rabi'a, learn from his manners before you learn from his knowledge. And they would say things like ايت الفقهاء والعلماء فتعلم من أدبهم قبل علم فإن ذاك أحب لك من كثير من الحديث. Go and learn from the fuqaha and knowledge, but learn their manners before you learn their knowledge, because that's more beloved to me than that you come home with much hadith. What if you come with the hadith and you're just using the hadith as a weapon against people? You have no sense of internalizing the great value of that hadith. Reminds me of sometimes Sahaba, when they would narrate hadith, like the famous hadith Qudsi, when Allah says, Ya ibadi inni haramtu zulma ala nafsi wa ja'altu bainakum haraman fala tadhalim, then it goes, Ya ibadi, you know, kullukum dal, and it's a long hadith. One of the narrators, Abu Idris al-Khawlani, it says, إِذَا حَدَّثَ الْحَدِيث جَثَاءَ لَرُكْبَتَيْهِ, he would kneel on the floor when he would narrate this hadith out of respect for the magnitude of the hadith. Having that sense of tradition and sense of, this is so big. I mean, this is a revelation from the heavens to the earth. And Allah made me, you know, Allah in the Quran, He says يَمُنُّونَ عَلَيْكَ أَنْ أَسْلَمُوا. Allah says what you just said. I mean, how you're describing it, they think that, you know, you're doing a favor, you know.
They become Muslim.
Yeah, that's it. Do you think this is some kind of a favor they're doing to you? And Allah says it is not that they're doing a favor to anyone. It's a favor upon them that Allah made them Muslims. And when Allah says وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ, the ulama, they say, Allah says, you know, have fear of Allah, اتَّقِ اللَّهِ حَقَّ تُقَاتِهِ وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. This last part, وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ, so Allah is saying, if Allah is saying don't die unless you're Muslims, well, how would you know if you don't know when you're going to die? Isn't it? Yeah. And the whole point is saying that, therefore, just make sure at every moment you're reaffirming your sense of Islam, submission to Allah. Therefore, that sense of cautiousness that we should have, I think, is the same with
also
with
need
this.
like humility, just in your own analysis of something, and you know, however big a researcher or scholar you might be, you know, when scholars disagree with each other, you can tell there's some kind of, you know, manners, there's some compassion, there's some
and mechanism of research. I think it was Imam Shibli. It was Imam Shibli who said, I think it was, who said that the knowledge is in 3 stages, and he said the first one is that when people start learning, they become arrogant. Isn't arrogant is the first one?
3 gates.
3 gates, I think it was.
I heard a tribute to Abdullah ibn Abbas.
Abbas, okay.
The first gate is arrogance, you think you know everything.
Yeah.
Then
ignorance. Because you realize
ignorance was the last one. Final gate was ignorance. Second gate was humility. Something like that.
Yeah.
We'll just add it properly later.
Yeah, you're all changing it around to someone. Yeah, I love
this. So we're unreliable narrators. And,
yeah, but that's a very profound, you know, to realize that your first step is you're going to be
and
you're going to think you know everything.
Just knowing what you don't know, because a lot of us I mean, this kind of phase used to happen in private, maybe, or you know, used to affect your immediate surroundings. But now it's played out online, and thousands of people can see. When you think, you know, when people don't realize the difference between a hadith or an ayah in theory or a ruling from the past, and you implementing it on a particular thing in real life now, right? So many people don't realize that process of you implementing it on a real life thing in real life right here is something that requires a scholar to do. And we might think we're following the early scholars, we're following the tradition, we're following the Quran and the Sunnah. If we, you know, find some ruling somewhere and we apply it ourselves here, and we say, look, That's right. And that person's disagreeing with this, and he's a deviant, or he's changing Islam, or he's watering down things. We're not realizing that process of us applying something from a book that we find and saying it applies here in real life, that goes through our own cognitive process. And it's influenced and painted and colored by so many things. We should have the humility to say, okay, I think that applies here, but disclaimer, I'm not a scholar. If a scholar disagrees with me, obviously I have to be humble in that. Assalamu alaikum, guys. Last reminder, I promise. Head over to islam21c.com/donate to help this movement get to the next level. So we have genuine, high-quality media articulating Islam in the 21st century and developing confident Muslims impacting the world for the better.
One of the things Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says, radiallahu anhu, he said, إِنَّهُ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ أَنْ يَقُولَ الَّذِي لَا يَعْلَمْ اللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ. It is from ilm, it is from knowledge for the one who doesn't know to say Allah knows best. I mean, that is a statement of knowledge. The angels, they said, Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alim al-hakim. Glory be to Allah, we have no knowledge. That's your foundation point, except what you've taught us. Glory be to you. You are all knowing, all wise. So I think we should be careful of our own selves, because shaitan will trap you one way or another.
Famous story of Imam Malik, rahimahullah. He was asked so many questions. He said,
he kept saying, exactly.
Once I had an exam with, I think it's Sheikh Bilal Ismail. We had a like a Skype test, and he said, "Have you prepared?" I said, half of knowledge is to say I don't know. So if I say la adri to each question, I'm guaranteed 50%. 50%. And he goes to me, "You are guaranteed a fail because the pass mark is 60%. I was like, "Oh man, that's so part of your research and your interest, you were saying that is in let me try and pronounce this correctly, apocalypticism and messianism and eschatology and all that kind of good stuff. So this recent kind of another thing I get annoyed with, Muslims kind of just sharing and making a big deal out of something and making it go viral, is this Netflix series called Messiah. And you mentioned, you saw some of it for your research purposes. I haven't seen it, but I kind of knew what was coming. That somebody strategically probably leaked this out to make a massive, furore about this and make people, religious people, Muslims, Christians, Jews in particular, kind of share this around and make it go viral. What were your views about this?
Okay. So my PhD, in fact, was is on looking at the place of books of Fada'il al-Quds, in
Jerusalem
and Sham generally, and the place of religious poetry, in the effort to recapture al-Quds from the Crusaders.
Jihad poetry,
that's right, and other poetry also, there's love poetry in there, love poetry in there.
It's romantic.
But the idea of apocalypticism was very central in that respect because of the newfound things happening in Bilad Sham at that time. It was the first time ever Muslims had lost Bayt al-Maqdis. And so even As-Sulami, by the way, in the Kitab al-Jihad, he painted this whole thing in apocalyptic terms by saying that, if you are the ones that are going to fight the Crusaders and take back Jerusalem, perhaps you'll be with the army that would capture Constantinople, and then Isa will descend, and then you will be with his army. Say now Urban II in the four accounts of his speech in Clermont in 1095. One of them is one by a man called Guibert of Nogent, who was a French priest or monk. And he painted his speech in very apocalyptic terms, saying that if he, fight make the Masjid al-Aqsa into a temple once again, then the Antichrist is going to come and sit on the temple, and then Jesus is going to come and fight the Antichrist. And so it's kind of a very apocalyptic setting.
This is kind of the right-wing Christians' kind of involvement in Zionism as well.
That's right. Absolutely.
Try and hasten the kind of
because that's it. Because they believe that place, what we call Al-Aqsa, the entirety of the compound between the walls of Sulaiman alayhi salam, or the original wall at least, is Al-Aqsa, but they believe that that's where the Antichrist has to sit before Jesus comes and defeats him. And so therefore it's very kind of geared towards that. Messianism is this idea that, you know, world always needs a Messiah, like a savior, to save itself from its perils. In Bilad al-Sham, you had a lot of earthquakes, particularly in the 1150s. And these earthquakes raised anxieties and tensions in the Muslims because they thought something is happening. That was kind of, so 1150s. In 1183, a big thing happened called the Red Sea incursion of Reynaud de Chatillon, when he traveled to the Hijaz and he wanted to unearth the body of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And so then Salah ad-Din sent his naval expedition headed by Hussam ad-Din Lu'lu. And he prevented Reynaud de Chatillon's, doing that. But he was so close, by the way. But what it did is it kind of raised anticipation, because thinking, well, something really big is happening.
Kind of mood. Was it the turn of the Islamic century as well?
That's right.
So you have that kind of millenarian mood in the air that says a reviver is going to come.
Absolutely. So, but what it did is it worked favorably in one respect for the army of Salah ad-Din, because it meant that their jihad was a more worthy jihad, a more important jihad, a more kind of cataclysmic. It was more lasting. It was more meaningful in that sense. It gave them that sense of added impetus. But there, of course, is a great danger in having a mindset that is apocalyptic fueled. Very, very dangerous. A lot of cults, particularly Christian cults, who Waco is a very famous example. But there's so many others, more contemporary, more recent ones. Many things happen in Russia, where they believe the end is coming. 2012 was one year, 2016 was another year.
So some people with hats and t-shirts.
And they said it's going to happen now. And so they kind of they become recluse, and they not socially active anymore. And they kind of get a lot of soups and tins of tinned food, and they stockpile them, and weapons as well, and they prepare themselves for the Armageddon.
A bit like Brexit.
Stockpiling. Exactly.
Stockpiling food.
But it's beautiful. Look at this hadith. Allahu Akbar. I actually gave a talk in East London on New Year's Eve. My talk was titled "The Return of the Messiah."
Really?
because they said the Netflix series came out the next day, on the 1st. And it was kind of, I think it was good, because it was kind of just to forewarn the Muslims, perhaps, because there are a lot of confusing things in the TV series, The Messiah, by the way, that I thought very confusing. But in our tradition, because we were on the point of apocalypticism, the Prophet ﷺ, he disallowed us to have such an attitude as Muslims. In fact, a very famous hadith. He says, إن قامت الساعة وفي يد أحدكم فصيلة وإن استطاع لكم حتى يغرس فليغرسه كما قال. He says, if the last hour comes and in one of your hands is a seed, and you're on the floor about to plant the seed, and you're able not to get up until you've planted it, plant the seed. Meaning, just be active, be socially productive in society. Now, one of the ones I really love is from Abdullah ibn Salam, Allah be pleased with him, the one who was a Jew, became a Muslim, the rabbi became Muslim, Sahabi Jalil, radiallahu an, and he says, in sami'ta bid-dajjal qad kharaj, if you heard the Dajjal has come out, wa anta ala wadin, and you're in the valley, and you have your seeds to plant, fala ta'jal, do not delay in planting the seeds. And look what he says, look at this, look at perception, look at the genius, the wisdom. He says, فَإِنَّ لِلنَّاسِ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ عَيْشًا. Because look at the genius, I mean, it gives me shivers sometimes when I think, oh my God, this is too brilliant. He says, because people after him will have life. So if the
world's not going to end.
The world's not going to end, that's it. So people will need the trees, they need the fruit, they need the shade, they'll need the water. And if you don't plant your seeds, when he goes after his 40 days on earth, then what's going to happen to the people after? Meaning, always think about your future investments. The things you do today, make it lasting and meaningful for those who come after you tomorrow. So therefore, that's kind of very offsets the idea of being in a mindset of apocalypse, being so fearful. In fact, one Sahaba, they used to be scared of the Dajjal. The Prophet came and he says, "What are you?" Because they said that any rustling of the leaves would make us panicky as a Dajjal. And the Prophet said to them, he said, "Look, if the Dajjal comes while I'm alive, I'll deal with him for you." He said, "If he comes out, the kids of Medina will chase him away with their slippers." You know, that's Iman, Allahu Akbar. But he says, if he comes when I'm not here, Wallahu Khalifatu ala kulli Muslim. You know, Allah is the Khalifa of every Muslim. And he says, Ya Ibadullah, caretaker. He says, Ya Ibadullah, Ya Ibadullah, Ya Ibadullah, fathbutu. In that time, O servants of Allah, be firm. And he says, إِذَا أُلْبِسَ عَلَيْكُمْ فَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ رَبَّكُمْ لَيْسَ بِأَعْوَرٍ. If he comes amongst you, remember your Lord isn't one-eyed. He gave him these things. You know, من حفظ 10 آيات من أول سورة الكهف عصم من الدجال. Whoever memorizes first 10 ayat of الكهف, he's protected from the Dajjal. Imam al-Nawawi, by the way, says, why did he mention the first 10 ayat of الكهف? He says, من تدبرها لم يفتتن بالدجال. Whoever contemplates these 10 verses is afflicted with it. What is Allah saying? What
won't be afflicted by the tribulation of the Dajjal.
That's it. What is Allah saying? إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا وَإِنَّا لَجَاعِلُونَ مَا عَلَيْهَا صَعِيدًا جُرُزًا. Everything you see of spectacle, of amazement, finery, everything is like the pompous, everything that's beauty. That's it. It's just there for a short time. See, it isn't. It's all fleeting. It's all passing. And Allah is saying, just like it's there, one day it's just not going to be there. So never having a sense of amazement. This is so amazing. How is the Dajjal doing all of that? He's pointing to the sky. The rain is coming, but he has limitations. This is the main point. His limitations. One physical defect, of course, of his right eye. He has limitation in power, because the boy, by the way, when he's cut in half and the Dajjal walks between him, you know, and the one who was killed, he will say to the people, he will say to them, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, innahu la yaf'al ba'di bi ahadin min an-nas. O people, he will never do ever again to anyone else after he's done to me. Limitation, meaning that means his power is limited. He can only do it like once in this big scene, and then after that he will have no power to do it ever again, you know. And all of these are things for us to think about. The weakness of this. And to be mindful, and it's very important. In fact, I had a thing, you know, with my own family. I said, we need to know about the Dajjal. You need to know the prophets. This is one of the big components of the tradition of alamat as-sa'a, the signs of the end of time. But never for us to become so apocalyptic in our mindset, thinking that, you know, I can't function. Allah wants you to function as a member of society, to be purposeful, to be good to people, your neighbors, and everything. And when things come, then you have to be resilient, you know.
So you think this series was just trying to kind of...
Well, I think it creates confusions. Yeah, it did, because remember that the in the series...
I heard it was rubbish anyway. American propaganda, you know.
Yeah, no, for sure, because it's always the CIA work out everything. Yeah. I mean, they must really know some proper secrets. How does America always understand everything? Because the CIA figure out he's kind of a con artist, you know. You know, I mean, it has to be
spoiler alert.
Yeah. So
this little fake Dajjal was beaten by the real Dajjal.
Yeah, but the thing is, then there's an ending of it which kind of upturns things again. So the thing that's, I think, for Muslims to be very mindful of is that the Dajjal, of course, has a Dajjal has a place. The Prophet said, you know, since Adam was created until end of time, every Prophet warned the people about the Dajjal. There's no fitna greater than the fitna of Dajjal since Adam until the end of time. And he will come with a lot of temptations. You know, the Prophet says, "Man sami'a anhu falyan'a minhu." Whoever hears of him should stay away from him. Stay away from him. It isn't something of curiosity. I'm going to go and see the Dajjal, because inna rajul, a man will go to him thinking that, you know, he's someone truthful and he will follow him. The Prophet says that a man will go and restrain his women, you know, for yuthikum ribatan. He will keep them at home, makhafatan, out of fear, and takhruj ilayhi, because out of fear that they're going out to see him. So therefore, be mindful of that. It isn't something that's easy. I mean, if people are where we...
What do you think about these interpretations that, you know, the Dajjal is like a system, or, you know, some kind of Hollywood, or capitalism, or, you know...
What about Disney? You forgot Disney, brother.
Yeah, that's
forgot that.
well.
I just mentioned about my island. We weren't listening at Pocahontas. I gave all the signs, brother. I gave all the clues there. You know. No, I mean, Dajjal is a man. He is described as shab, ahmar, qasir. He's given physical descriptions as being short and reddish in appearance, and a young man. And of course his eyes, there's a defect in his eye. You know, and these are I tell you what. Look, when the Prophet says, for example, that he will, he will pass in the earth for 40 days. Okay, 40 يوما أو ليلا.
Disney's been around for longer.
No, he says, so he says the first day will be the span of kasanatan as a year,
Okay.
and the second day kashahrin as a month, and the third day ayami ka ayamikum, or kama qala, he says his days will be like your days, mean that they're just normal days. So first day a year, second day a month, and the remaining days as normal days. Now look at the question of Sahaba. Umar once says, he said husnu su'al nisful ilm, that a good question is half of knowledge. Yeah. Look at the Sahaba, look at the questions that they asked. Yeah. This is where our faith should be, our level of concern should be in Islam. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember this one.
They
how are we going to work out the prayer times?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
they said, "Atakfina fina salatu yawm." Would it be enough for us to pray once? They're asking about things that affect their akhirah. What about our daily prayers? How are we going to deal with this? And this shows a level of understanding.
Calculator.
Level of understanding for them, because they're concerned about how that's going to affect their normal practice of Islam, and it's a proof for them. It reminds me of the hadith about when you die. Allah give us deaths upon iman. I mean, it says that when you're in your grave, you're in your grave, and the angel of death and the angels will come, Munkar and Nakir. And they will say to the deceased person, Ijlis, sit up. فَيَجْلِسُ غَيْرَ فَزِعًا مَشْؤُوفٍ. He will sit up without anxiety, without apprehension. If he was a pious servant of Allah, may Allah make us of them. And then it says in one narration that he will see like a scene of the sun setting. فَيَجْلِسُ وَيَمْسِحُ عَيْنَيْهِ. And he will sit up, rub his eyes, وَيَقُول, and he will say, دَعُونِي أُصَلِّي. Let me pray. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. It's authentic hadith, and he will say, let me pray salah. And they will say, no, first he answers our questions. But it just shows it's a hujjah lahu, it's a proof for him, even in the grave. Allahu Akbar. And this is just a whole point about the fact that Dajjal is a living, is a person. It's not a system. I mean, the system, of course, could be supporters of the Dajjal.
Caught up in all of these theories and worrying about the physical nature, but worry about your practice.
Yeah, I mean the system, of course, could be cohorts of the Dajjal, supporters of Dajjal. They could help implement his system. They could be the pre-runners to establish like fitna and fasad in the world before he comes. All of that is true. I'm not denying that. But I'm saying him as a person the Prophet spoke of, that's a living human being. He is from Bani Adam. It's from the sons of Adam.
Okay, subhanAllah. Okay, I'd like to carry on this convo. I mean, time flies when you're having fun, alhamdulillah. But we've got to let you go, I'm afraid.
Allah bless you.
I mean you as well. Jazakallah khair for coming.
Jazakallah khair.
Sheikh Uthman.
Jazakallah khair. Allah bless you.
Jazakallah khair you for watching at home as well. If you like this podcast, give it a like and a share. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're into that kind of stuff, we're on iTunes, Google, Spotify, Castbox, all that kind of good stuff. If you made it to the end of this podcast, well done. You've got some extra awesome points, mashallah. And see you in the next one. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Unscripted.